Yeah. So we're bouncing around a little bit today. But if you go to your week 11, so session 11, yeah, week 11, inside here, what assignments do I have in here? Oh, okay. Um, the assignment that's getting turned in today, the swimsuit, that is the last assignment, retouching. We still will go over a lot of different things in retouching, but or compositing, but I want you to focus on your final project, so I'm not going to hit you with anything else. However, I do want to catch up on a couple things that we haven't done yet. This is actually something that was designed to do today, so this is where I'm going to start. If you go into your session 11 folder, there is a file called depth map. If you can bring that open into Photoshop, that's where we're going to start. So it's an image that we've been playing around with for some time now. And this has not been balanced out completely, but it's close enough. But that's not the part here. The part that I wanted, so does everybody have this file open? Anybody not? Okay. So I showed you a couple of weeks ago about how to do the illusion of depth of field, and basically we turned a background into a smart object, and then we ran a Gaussian blur on it, and then we actually used a reflected gradient in the smart object mask in the smart filter mask to sort of make the foreground soft, and then the area right under the person's feet sharp, and then the background soft. But there's a far superior way of doing that. There's actually something that was developed in Photoshop. It's been around for a little while right now, but it actually it truly recreates the physics of a lens attached to a camera inside of Photoshop. And you use it to actually focus your image. And so what we're going to do is we have to, in order to have this thing work, you have to tell Photoshop what's close, what's far away, what's in the middle. You need to build this thing called a depth map. And so that's what we're going to do in this image right now. We're going to start out, we're going to build the depth map, and then I'll show you how the filter that uses that actually works. And it's just, if you're trying to introduce the sense of depth of field in an image, especially in a composite, it is hands down the best way to do it. It blows everything else out of the water. A Gaussian blur is not really defocusing the way a lens actually does it. Like you get no bokeh in a Gaussian blur, which you would get in a lens. So anyway, so that's what we're going to tackle today. So to do this, the first thing I want to start out with is just to make a selection of the body. If you take a look down in our channels palette, I don't have a selection of the body yet, so I'm just going to come over to the composite body number 2, and I'm going to just hover over the thumbnail of this, hold down the command key and click, and it loads the outline selection of the girl. And then I'm going to go up to the very top. I do have a couple of color adjustment layers that are on this. I want to build my depth map above this. It doesn't really matter where you build it, because ultimately you save it as a selection in your channels palette. But so I'm going to click the very top of those adjustment layers. I'm going to add a blank layer on top of this, and then I'm going to fill this with black. If you're unsure whether your foreground and background colors are defaulted to black and white, just hit the D key first. Now they will be. And then again, to fill with your foreground color, it is Option Delete, or if you're on a Windows machine, it's also Option, but Backspace, I think. Anyway, you guys have done this enough, you know where we're at. Command D to deselect. So this is the beginning. The way a depth map actually works is that different shades of gray determine what is in focus and what is out of focus. So this is basically the first move that I'm going to make on this guy. The second move that I'm going to make on this guy is we're going to add a gradient to this, an adjustment layer that's going to be on top of this. So I'm going to click on my the very bottom of my layers palette, the circle that's half black and half white to get an adjustment layer. And if you open this up, you will see you've got two types of gradient in here. You've got a regular gradient, it's just that word, and then you've got a gradient map. We are not going to use the gradient map right now, but we are going to use that later on in the day. I'm just going to pick a regular standard gradient. And when you do that, it'll actually open up. There's a gradient fill in this. In the drop-down menu that you have actually got up at the very top, you're going to open up the basics, and we're going to pick the middle one. The middle one is actually telling you we're going from foreground to we're going from foreground color to transparency. We want to keep this one on because it makes it easier to see where we're actually going to use this gradient on the image. So that's the one you want to pick. If black is not your foreground color, cancel out of this really quickly. Hit the X key to make black your foreground color, because that's the color of the gradient that we actually need. Again, we're establishing the area of this image that we want to be in focus. So I'm going to go back to that again, click on it. I'm going to add just a regular gradient, not a gradient map, but a regular gradient. Foreground to background, foreground to transparency. Then underneath that, in the style, click on the drop-down menu, and you're going to do a reflected one. And when you get the reflected one, you'll see we've got this big black thing that's going across the middle of our image. I'm going to hold on, guys. I'm going to cancel out of here again. I'm just going to double-click the hand so you can see the full image, so that we're not guessing about this. And try this one more time. Gradient. And again, linear to reflected, and you got a big band that goes across the middle. Now you can come over onto your image and you can click and you can move this band up and down. But first I need to make it thinner, because this is going to be the area of my image that is in focus. To actually change that, you use scale. So if you hover your cursor over this scale and click, you get the scrubby slider. You can actually pull this down, and you'll see it starts to narrow your gradient down. It pulls it down to a little bit tighter range. So I'm going to pull mine down around, it's roughly around 30%. Again, I'm trying to imagine the area that I want to be in focus underneath her feet. And I'm going to then just drag this down till it actually falls under her feet. I'm going to make my scale a little bit bigger. I want it to go a little bit larger area that I think is sort of like in focus. So I'm up around a 36, 7, somewhere percent if you want the same sort of thing that I'm doing on this. And I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And that is the weirdest looking gradient here that I maybe have ever seen, because that does not look like... That does not look anything at all like my gradient, does it? But it's in the right spot, and it's doing the right thing. So yeah.
Can you move the gradient once you already press like the control option?
If you click on the gradient part again and hit the V key, you might be able to. No, you can't. So you would just start over again. Yeah, sorry. Hang on 1 sec. That's all right. Let's hit cancel out of this. Let's try this again. Oh, you still got a selection going. That's part of the problem. And you're doing, that's why you can't see it. It's right behind them. So Command B and not try it. Yeah. And then you can move it up and down now, and you can actually, but you again, you want to make sure that you get a reflected one. Okay. So I will do that one last time. Actually, I won't do that one last time because it's in the correct spot. Okay, so this part's working right now, but I want to actually introduce a whole nother element to this as well. So the tree, which is kind of in the sort of halfway back to the background, I want to make that, so what I'm ultimately going to do is I'm going to put this on a white background. But the tree, I need it to not be white. Again, the leaves and all the stuff that are in the far background need to be softer than the tree. This tree is sort of like halfway defocused. So to do that, I'm going to just create a brand new layer. I'm going to then just any selection tool that you want to use to actually do this with. One of the selection tools that we haven't used yet, we've used the quick selection tool quite a bit. We've even used the magic wand a little bit. But if you click on the object selection tool, hang on, if you're going to do this, you need to go back down to your background. You need to make the background active because we're going to do a selection of this background. So all the way down, click on the background to make it active. Then over in the selection tool group where the quick selection tool is, you can actually grab object selection. And when you do that, object selection is actually using local artificial intelligence. You see if I hover over the tree, it will actually select the tree. If I come down and I do, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't do really fine things, so it's like doing my whole image right now, but it gets the tree part actually pretty well done. So I'm going to click on it, and it will simply load this as a selection. If you then, I'm going to hit the V key so that I quit getting that purple thing showing up. I'm going to zoom in down here on the bottom part of here. I don't really have all of the trees selected down here. I do want to add more. I want to add the leaves that are down here and the rocks that are right around this part. So you can then go to the quick selection tool. Now, in order to use this, we actually need to have it. It's typically it's in the plus mode. You just need to make sure that the icon up at the very top that's got the little plus on it is selected, so that we're automatically adding to the selection. We're not going to do a brand new one. And then I'm simply going to click and do the area that's around this part. I am going to go after the leaves, and I'm going to go after the ones that are in the top part right there. I can also hit the rest of this side to clean it up a little bit, make sure it grabs everything there. And the rest of the selection actually looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go now back all the way up to the very top of my image to that blank layer that I had, and I'm going to fill this with a 50% gray. The easiest way to do that, you could open up your foreground color picker and change it to a 50% gray, but the easier way, since we've already got this selection going, is to simply come up to the Edit menu, down to Fill, and in the drop-down box for content for fills, in the content you can pick 50% gray, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and say OK. And so now the tree is actually filled with this gray. Command D to deselect that. And then finally, I'm going to go down to the, I need to put all of this on a white background. So to do that, I'm going to go to my top adjustment color layer, the one that's right underneath the black figure itself. I'm going to select that so that when I add a layer, it will actually be underneath these things that I've built, yet on top of the color. So then I'm going to add a solid color adjustment layer, and I'm going to do it in white. So solid color, you can actually come over and use your little eyedropper tool to select the background color, and it will be white. And I'm going to double click the hand, and this is going to be my depth map. So what you can see in here that's happening is that I'm going to say the area that is black will be in focus. As this black starts to fade to white, it begins to softly defocus. The tree is going to be somewhere in the middle part of that. I might want to extend the focus part to the tree from the black part. You can go in and hand paint on these things. We can do all of that, but I think this will actually give us a pretty good illusion of it all. So to do this, now that we've got just this part showing, you're going to come to your channels palette, and you're going to just grab, it doesn't matter the red, green, or the blue, and it doesn't matter, you're just going to copy one of those. And then you're going to double click on this, and you're going to rename it depth map. And then all those things that we use to build this, you can throw away. So I'm going to throw away the color fill, I'm going to throw away the figure, I'm going to throw away the gradient, and I'm going to throw away the tree. We don't need that anymore. It's all been built. It's right here called depth map. So then to use this thing, the only downside to this is that you cannot do this, we can't do this as a smart object. If we create a smart object and try to actually use the depth map on it, the calculations simply don't work. So it's unfortunate. I wish it was, but that's the name of the game. So I'm going to select my very top layer. I'm going to then do a merged stamp version of everything that is in my image. To do that, you hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E, and it will make a merged stamp version of all of your image on the very top. I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to rename it DOF, depth of field. Is everybody there? Okay, where are you?
I did the command and it didn't work.
Did you select your very top layer?
Yeah.
Did you hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E? 4 keys.
Oh, there we go.
Yep. Kira.
How much the color field to make the layer under the
Okay, so select your top layer. It is selected. You're going to add, yeah, you just need to add an adjustment layer. So go to your adjustment layers, that one, and add a solid color. And you're going to use the eyedropper tool to select white. No, white, just one, yeah, white. That's it, and say okay. Good, and then you're going to double click on the hand right here so that you zoom all the way out. Your figure's not showing, you need to turn on the eyeball of your figure. And it looks like you put that layer above, so you just need to drag her above the solid color adjustment layer. Perfect, and then you're gonna go into your channels palette and just copy the blue channel, red channel, anyone, doesn't matter, just drag one down and copy. Just drag it down to the little icon. And double click on it and call it depth map. And then throw all those layers away. That's all we need. Okay, so to use this thing, we now have, oh, you need a merge stamp version of this. Yeah, so you can get rid of all those guys. You want to keep all the adjustment layers, you want to just get rid of everything else. So, not that, that's your figure. It's all the stuff at the very top, get rid of the tree. Just hit the delete key. And get rid of the figure. Perfect, get rid of the solid color adjustment layer. Perfect. Now hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E. And that is a merge stuff, and then rename it UF, depth of field. Okay, so to run this thing, make sure you have your top depth of field filter selected. Come up to the filter menu. You're going to come down to the blur menu item, and you're going to come down to lens blur. And when you do that, it's going to actually open up. This is an extremely processor intensive thing, because what this thing is really doing, it's recreating a lens in Photoshop for you, but it's got all the physics of a lens, and that's what all of this stuff on this control panel are on the other side. If your computer is not really the fastest, you might want to select the faster up at the previews at the very top. It'll render your image a little bit quicker. But ultimately, before you do that, you're going to want to click on more accurate. Then, in the source for this, you're going to click on the drop-down menu, and this will show you everything that is in your channels palette that we could be selecting. You want to pick the depth map. This is the thing that we just made. So that's what we're going to use as the source. We're going to leave the set focal point alone right now, but you'll see how that works in just a little bit. Then down here, in terms of the shape, this is actually the lens that you can recreate. So the shape of the iris, this would be the apertures inside of your lens. So if you actually know what lens you're using, if you click on this drop down, you'll see really cheap lenses only use 3 blades to do the aperture. That would be a triangle version of it. Really expensive lenses use an octagonal one. So if you're using like the Zeiss lenses, the medium format, the Schneider lenses for the medium format in the studio, those are all using an octagonal setup in there. So you can really control that. And for our cases right now, you can leave it on 6. That part isn't going to impact this a whole lot. But you can also get into reconstructing the actual blades of your aperture. That's what this blade curvature is about, and rotation, all of these things that they'll actually control this part. For our purposes, we don't really need to control that much. We are just, again, there's enough complexity of what we're looking at here that you're not going to really see that much difference. But if you take the radius of your iris and you crank this up, this is what the blur actually does. and you can see my background has just gotten considerably softer. I'm going to zoom in. We're going to actually overdo this, but you can use your preview check mark to turn this on and off to see what we're doing, and you can see that the girl is actually staying really sharp. The tree behind her is a little bit softer, and then the background is really going soft for me. If you take a look at the foreground, the same thing is actually happening here. Using this to turn on, again, the preview on and off, you can actually see that the foreground is really softening up, and then this is going through and hitting her. If you then click on this set focal point, this thing will refocus your image. So click on set focal point, and then click on the like the very foreground. Click on the leaves and stuff in the very foreground. If you click on that, it focuses on that, and you can see the girl just got incredibly soft. If you go back and you click on the tree is going to snap into focus. The girl is soft and the background is in focus. If you go back into the back part, so this is actually refocusing the lens that has been created in Photoshop. I'm going to come back and click on the girl because that's who I do want in focus here. And then I personally feel like I've got a radius of 47. I feel like it's too strong. I mean, this would be a lens that was completely open and wide open. You're shooting at f2, f2.8 here, something like that. Or it's, in all honesty, it's probably even a faster lens. It's probably a 1.8 or a 1.4, and it's wide open because this is a full-length figure. So it's really hard to get that much fall off. So I'm going to drag my depth of field down to something that I think is a little bit more reasonable. Again, you'll see that there's a little blue bar that goes along the bottom of your screen every time you make that change. That's actually your processor recalculating the lens. I'm going to drop mine down a little bit more. So I'm down around in the 30s, and I'm feeling like this is a better way of actually doing it. Yeah, that feels better to me, and I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Depth of field. Questions? Okie dokie, you can throw that away. You don't need to save that part. All right, so the next thing we're going to get into is extreme color correction in compositing. Now, we've already done we've already used check layers to actually do our adjustments, and they work really well if you're sort of close. And the thing that I had said to you guys before is sort of close. It means that if you're using a color card in both your scene and whatever you're compositing, so your scene and your subject, if you're using cards in there, you can color balance both of them. They will both be the same color balance if they are white balanced. You can then put your two images together, and then you can make your entire composite warmer or cooler, or you can color grade your entire composite. You can do all of that kind of stuff. But the real thing that we've got going for us in that is that we are able to color balance both of those things first. There's a lot of times where not a lot of times, but there are occasions where that's not going to be possible. And so I want to show you how we do color correction that's on the extreme side. So what I'm going to show you right now is a technique that I worked on for a long time to figure out. And so I will tell you this right off the bat. It's really complicated. So there's a recipe for this. So to find it and to find the file that you need to work with, I think this is in your Session 9 folder. So go to your Session 9 folder, and it is this extreme color matching methods. There's a number of them in here. I'm going to show you the one that I think is the most successful, and I'll be honest with you, I developed this thing, but I have to go back and actually read through this thing every time I want to do it, because it's not the extreme color correction is not something that I run into a whole lot. Again, I typically do more the kind of work that you've already seen up until now, where I'm really color balancing both stuff in the studio and stuff out in the field and putting those together, or I'm building a completely different background that doesn't need to be color balanced. Anyway. So, but I do want to show you this part, because if you get into the really challenging part of this thing works incredibly well. So that's what we're going to do. So if you can find that PDF and double click on it, you can then see there's some links in here that we can actually use. So this is the way I want to start. So if you can't get that thing open or whatever, you're just going to have to follow along, or you can do a search for Adobe Color. Does anybody in this room ever use Adobe Color back when they spelled it with a K? It's a whole separate program that Adobe manages. It's a website, really. So they've renamed it, but nonetheless, this link hopefully will take us there. So I'm going to click on mine to actually try to get us there. And I don't want Express Free. So I'm just going to click on this, and this is Adobe Color. So I'm going to put this, again, I'm going to keep going back to my PDF because I've got to sort of like read through this. The first thing that you do, so can everybody get to this website? Anybody not? Because if you don't get to the website, you're not going to do any of this assignment, or it's not an assignment, you're just going to watch. So the first thing you need to do is you actually have to sign in. So click on up at the very top right-hand corner, if you're already signed into Adobe, hopefully you will be signed into this. But if you're not, just click on this and then click sign in. And it's just your regular, it's the exact same login that you use to log into Photoshop and to do everything else. So the next thing on my list to go down here is I'm signing into my account. I am on the Create tab. So this is the Create tab up here in the very top. So the top thing that goes along the very side, you want to click on Create tab, and then you want to click on the sub tab, not Color Wheel, but Extract Theme. And it's going to ask you to drag and drop a file onto your computer, onto this window, or you can go navigate. You can click on the select a file, and that'll allow you to navigate through. I'm going to go find the file that I want you to use. It's in this very same folder in your session number 9. It's this Pix Imperfect Composite. So this guy, Hamish, I don't know how to say his last name, so I don't even try to say it, is probably the most successful, I think, Photoshop instructor on YouTube. He's got like, I don't know, 5 million, 10 million subscribers, really smart. These are his files. These are his working files. He actually does a version of this color correction on his website. So you can go see a different method, a different way of doing it. He doesn't go through what I'm going to go through and show you this one right here. But these are his files, and I've always appreciated the fact that he is as generous as he is to share all of this stuff. So at any rate, if you're into looking up anything and you want to go a little bit deeper than the majority of what most Photoshop people on YouTube do, Pix Imperfect definitely should be on your list. So at any rate, to see what it is, what we're going to do, if you click on this night scene, and I just to give you a quick preview, I'm just going to click on it and do just a quick open it up. This is going to be the destination where I want to put this person, and then there's a person it's called Lady in Red. It's just this is the image of a woman standing in some railroad tracks. So these are the two things that we're going to try to merge together. The thing that you need to pull into this website is the night scene. So I'm going to get rid of my lower window right here and the other 100,000 windows that I have open. And I'm going to simply grab the night scene and drag and drop it down onto that website and let go. And when you do that, it will open up immediately, and it will pick what it says is what it believes are the 5 dominant colors. So this is where you can do this work in Photoshop yourself. You could come into Photoshop and say, well, I'm just going to pick the dominant colors myself. But it has to be a range of color, and it also has to be a range of tone. So you need, what are the colors of your highlights? What are the colors of your midtones? What are the colors of your shadows? And then you should probably do your quarter tones and your 3/4 tones as well. So in this case, it would be 5 different images. 5 different sample points on my image that I've got right here. So for me, one of these points is actually the black sky that's actually in the very back of my image. You can move these things around. I don't need the black sky. That is a generic, probably a 000 black. I don't need that. What I want is a really dark shadow that is a part of my street scene. So to get that, I'm going to click on that point that is up, because you should have gotten, I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that it should be the exact same points that I have on mine. So if you don't have these, something is off. So anyway, you can click on these and move them. I'm going to click on the circle, on the dark circle in the very top, and I'm going to drag it down into something on the lower part of the street. I'm going to stay away from that little white window, whatever that thing is, but down into the lower part. Again, I want a good dark tone, but I think it's going to be much more into the browns, and I'm going to let go. And this is going to be my tonal range. Now, it's just my nature to want these things to be in order of tone from darkest to lightest. So I'm going to change this. You can actually click on the color swatches that are on the very bottom and you can move them around. So I'm going to grab the one that's on the far right hand side and I'm simply going to drag it over till it is next to the next darker one. I'm then also going to then drag the next one that was over there so it goes in the middle, and then finally I'm going to drag the yellow so it goes up in the very top. So now I'm working from the darkest up to the lightest, and that's basically what I want to do in this. Then I'm going to go back to my recipe here again. So we've actually done all of this. We can drag the colors to match. The mood you want to set is, you'll see on the very side of your menu here, you can do colorful, you can do bright, muted. It's just a way to render your colors. You want to keep it at colorful because that's actually going to be the most saturated, and you'll have the greatest difference between these two. So that's what I would suggest you stay with. If you need to move the points around, you can reorder those. Then you're going to select My Library in the Save drop-down menu. So over on the far right-hand side, in this drop-down menu, you're going to do a Save As, click on this drop-down, and you want to do My Library. So we're going to put this into, everybody who has an Adobe account has a library. It's where you can actually store assets for yourself. You can do color swatches like we're doing here. You can do images, you can do logos, you can do all sorts of stuff you can store in your library. But we're going to click on My Library. It's going to name it for you right now. It's going to say it's going to color theme with the Night Street. It's already going to name this for us, which is great because that's what I want to do. And then I'm going to go back to my recipe one more time. Well, I'll probably come back more than one more time. Name it the way you want to, and then press the Save button. So I'm going to click Save down here at the bottom. Okay, it says it was saved to my library. Then you come up to the tabs that are along the very top, and you want to click on your libraries. And when this opens up in your My Library as a drop-down menu, you should actually see this color theme. Did everybody find that? Are we good on this part? Okay. So you're going to download it. If you hover over it, there is a little, I'm hovering over by the highlight part, there's a little download arrow, and it's saying download as a JPEG. I do not want this to download as a JPEG. I want this to download as an AES file. So hang on one second. Let me make sure. Again, I'm going to go back to my recipe and press Save. Okay, we've already gone through all of that. Go to your libraries. I've done that. Find your theme. Oh, double click on it. That's what we need to do. So back in your theme, don't download it, double click on it, it'll launch it, and this is where we can save it as something else. And I think we're downloading this as an ASE file. So hang on one second, let me make sure. Yeah, you're gonna download this as an ASE file, and yeah. And then we have done all the work that we need to do in this website. So click on download as ASE file. And then for me, I always put, when I do any work like this, so if I do color swatches for it, if I do a mesh for a liquify, if I do a text file describing my history, if I use any of those things, I always park it right next to the file that I'm working on. So to get this next to the file that you're working on, you need to go to your Session 9 folder. And inside your Session 9 folder, you have your Piximperfect composite. Inside of that, this is where you're going to save this file. And in my case, it's actually going to go in. Perfect. So now this part's actually done. To make sure that you have it, go see if you can find it. Look inside your the folder, and there should be this thing there. It's an ASE file. This is the description of your color. So then you can quit this website. We've done everything in there that we actually needed to do. So then again, if I go back to my recipes one more time, you can see how you actually get this into Photoshop. So in Photoshop, we're going to go to the swatches menu. Okay. So to do this, back into Photoshop, come up to the window menu and come down to swatches. It's something we typically don't keep open a lot, but we will use it on this. I'm going to open mine up a little bit bigger. Your swatches can be different. They can show up in different ways. If you look at the little drop-down menu to the right of the tab that says swatches and click on this drop-down menu, you can do tiny thumbnails, you can do small thumbnails, large thumbnails, a small list or a large list. I like a large list because it actually does, it'll give you descriptions as well as the color on this. But also in that flyout menu, if you go back to it again, we are going to do an import swatches. A dialog box will open up, and then you need to navigate to that folder, that ASE file that we just created. That's what we're actually looking for. So it will be in your session 9 folder in the Piximperfect overlay, Piximperfect composite, and it is this that Adobe Color ASE blah 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 file. So click on it and open it. And then if you go down to the very bottom of your swatches panel, there is a folder. If you click that open, inside that folder, you will actually see the color swatches that we just created. So is everybody good this far? All right. So now we're going to actually use this thing. You'll see I've got 2 sets of them because I've done this exercise more than once. I'm going to grab my swatches and I'm just going to park it over here next to my libraries for the time being. You can still scroll down and you can see them right here. So then we're actually going to build the composite now. We're going to actually sort of start the part. So to do that, go into the Piximperfect composite folder. First off, we want to open up the Night Street in Photoshop. So simply drag it on top of Photoshop. You should get this warning because it's an sRGB file. That's fine. So this is the first thing. This is going to be our background. And then the next one I'm going to open up is the lady in red. So it's a PSD file. If you also drag that on top of Photoshop, it should open up as well. And so now again, I don't like tabbed behavior, so I've got mine separate, which is the way I like mine. I'm still seeing part of my Finder that I don't want to see, so I simply click on Hide Others and it'll go away. And now this is basically what I need to actually generate this composite. With the lady in red on top, if you take a look down at the very bottom of the lady in red, I've already created a silhouette knockout for her. So just hover over the knockout thumbnail, hold down the Command key and click to load it as a selection. Come back over to the background that we've got over in here. And actually, I need to make a copy of this, so don't do that yet. So I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. I'm going to make a copy of this girl in the railroad tracks first, Command J. I'm going to convert that to a smart object because we are going to be transforming this back and forth. I do not want to do that destructively, so up to the layer menu, down to smart objects and convert to smart object. Guys, we've done this 1,000 times. Don't you feel like? I'm not telling anybody anything new here. This is how we do. We've been doing this over and over and over and over again, and it's the way that you're going to work. So at any rate, now I'm going to hover over the knockout channel, hold down my Command key, click to load it as a selection, and then come over to my smart object and add it as a layer mask. So if you turn off the background underneath it, you can see it's just a girl now sitting on transparency. So then I'm going to drag that layer that's got the layer mask on it on top of my scene, my night scene. I'm going to hold down the Shift key so it brings it centered into the image, and I'm going to let go. So now I've actually got the figure that's in my background, or on my background. Not in it yet. And then I'm going to go back to the original Lady in Red file and close it up. I've got everything I need from it. I don't need to save this. So this is how I'm going to start my composite. So does everybody have this far? Girl in red on this scene. Are we good? Okay, so the first thing before I actually do anything about trying to match the lighting or any of that kind of stuff in here is I need to scale her correctly. Now, if you go back to the original to see what it looks like, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click on the layer mask. You can see that I've got converging lines. I've got the railroad track lines, so I can figure out where her horizon line is right now. So I'm going to really quickly do that. I'm going to just hit the P key to get the pen tool. I'm going to go to my pasteboard by hitting the F key so that I can drag my points beyond the image. And then I'm just going to click on one side of the railroad tracks and I'm going to drag it back. And you want to make sure that you get it angled so that it runs right along the outside of the railroad track. I'm going to click once, and then I'm just going to bring points around here so that I can do the same thing with the other railroad track and not get too confused. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And you can see, typically a lot of times I'll pull down a ruler line to actually show this, but you can see where these two lines converge are right at her eye. So the horizon line of the girl is at her eye. Does this make sense what I just did? Guys, this is really critical when you're trying to do perspective matching in Photoshop. We good on this? Okay, so I don't need to do anything more than this. I can go into my path palette. I can throw this away. I now know that the horizon line is at her eyeball. So I'm going to click on my layers panel again. I'm going to hover over the layer mask, hold my shift key down and click again so that now I can see the scene. I'm going to temporarily turn the girl off so that I can find the horizon line of my scene. And I'm going to do the exact same thing I just did. So when you're doing stuff like this with an ancient, sort of an older building like this, I don't trust things like, if you look at the windows here, the windows that are on the right-hand side down at the bottom, these things look like they're made out of timber and they're probably 300 years old, right? I mean, they're ancient. The windows up above, though, are not. The windows up above have been done at a much later time in this building. So I'm not going to use the windows at the bottom because Lord knows they could be completely different sizes. They may not be level. All of that kind of stuff. The windows at the very top will be. I would not try to do any lines on the street because they're all curved, so that's not going to help me out at all. So I am going to start up here on the, again, I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. I'm still on my pasteboard so that I can find these lines. I'm going to click on a line under the windowsill at the very top, and then you simply want to trace it along all the windowsills, all the bottoms of them, exactly the same points. That's where your line, your converging lines need to go. And I'm going to click and say okay to that. Then I'm going to go to the other side over here, and I'm going to do the same thing with the windows that are on the other side. And I'm going to drag across, and I'm not convinced that I think that the second window on the other side is actually a larger window. So I'm going to ignore that, but I'm just going to go along the ledge of this windowsill right here. I'm going to just use that by itself. I'm not going to worry about the other window at all. I'm going to click here, and you can see where these two lines cross. This is now the horizon line of the street scene. So my rulers are showing. If your rulers are not showing, you cannot pull a guideline down. To get your rulers to show, click on your view menu and come down and put a check mark next to the rulers, and then you'll see them. And then you can come up, even with your pen tool selected, you can click on the top ruler and simply grab a guideline and drag it down in the middle. So that is now the horizon line of my background. So I'm going to hit path and I'm going to get rid of this guy. So now I can actually try to put these two images together. So I'm going to turn the girl back on so that I can see her. And you can see right now, if I want these two to actually match, I've got the girl's layer selected. I'm going to hit the V key. I actually have to move her down. This is how they would actually be matching right now. So again, this is like the guy who was in the train station. There is a horrible mismatch of vanishing points for these relative images. So I can't actually use this part to size or to scale the girl in doing any of this. They're just wildly different. The girl was shot from an extremely high vantage point. If you go back and hold down your shift key and click on the layer mask, you can see somebody's up on something high looking down on this, and that is not what's happening with the street scene. The street scene, if anything, they're crouched down a little bit. So it's just this mismatch. So I can't use horizon lines to actually do this part, but that's okay. I'll still be able to fake this pretty well. I'm going to scale her based on the doorway. So right now I don't want to see the horizon line in the background, so I'm just going to hit Command H to hide my extras. Then I'm going to hit the V key to get the move tool, and I'm going to move this girl right over next to the doorway. And I'm going to set her next to the doorway so that the bottom of her dress is touching just the sort of like the threshold of the door. So that's just the easiest way to put her into place. So then I've got to transform her. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Now in this case, I'm getting a really big dialog box. You can see if you zip out on this, it's still the entirety of the image. It knows that this thing has been masked. It's a layer mask on this, but I'm seeing the entirety of this image. I want much more precise control on the transform than I've got right now. So I'm going to hit the circle at the very top. I'm going to get out of this transform. So go up to your options bar at the very top, the circle with the slash through it, click on that, it gets rid of the transform. We are going to do a nested smart object. So on the smart object, we've got it selected. We are going to then convert this smart object with a mask into another smart object. So up to the layer menu again, down to smart objects, down to convert to smart object. Now you can see it's as if the girl is just floating on a completely open, transparent background. Now when I hit Command T, you'll see that my transform dialog box is directly around the girl. I don't need to worry about doing any of this. I can do some semblance of transforming in perspective with this setup, but at any rate, I'm going to zoom back in. So at this stage of the game, her feet are in the right spot. So I don't want to leave the transform anchor point at her crotch or right where her hands are, because if I do the transform, if I make her smaller, it's not only going to bring her head down, which I do want, but it's also going to bring her feet up, which I don't want. So I'm going to grab the anchor point that's right at her hands, and I'm going to drag it and put it right down at the very bottom control point in the middle. And now if I click on the link in the options panel, options bar, between the width and the height, it will then anchor them so that when I transform the width or the height, it will keep the image in, it'll respect the ratio of the image. So I'm going to hover over the height part. I get the scrubby slider. I'm going to click and I'm just going to bring her down. And when I do this, I'm going to zoom in before I say okay to that. I'm going to zoom into this, and I'm looking at the surround of this, because this is an old door. I'm guessing it's either in Italy or France or Spain maybe. At any rate, I need clues for how to, I mean, these, doors back those days, whatever, can be 10, 15, 20 feet tall. No, not 20, 15 feet tall. So I can't really use the door as my gauge, but I can use the doorbell that's sitting right on the edge of this. So everybody, close your eyes. Imagine yourself on the street. There's a doorbell right in front of you. Is it at your eye level? Is it down at your waist? Is it up above you? Do you have to reach up to it now? It's like pretty much slightly below eye level, right around your, that's about where it is, right? So that's where I'm going to put it for this girl to size her correctly. So right now, I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. You can move your tool. I mean, you can move. I've still got the transformed box around here. I'm going to move her back up again so that she is actually on the threshold. And then I'm simply going to drag this up to make it a little bit larger so that it's kind of at the bottom of her chin. And I'm feeling like that is scaled correctly for me. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark and say okay to this. So then I'm going to double click on the hand again to zoom out so I can see everything. I'm going to bring this girl back into space, back into the center. Now remember, distance does not change. I mean, distance is what changes. If we wanted her to appear further away, we would have to make her smaller. If we wanted her to appear closer to the camera, we would have to make her larger. In my case, I don't want to make her either one. I just want to move her away from the door into the middle of the street. So again, I'm going to hit the V key. I'm going to start to drag her towards the center of the street. If you then hold down your shift key, it will anchor that movement to only be right and left. And I'm going to put her out into the middle of the street. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I actually want her closer to the camera. I think she feels a little bit too far away. So I am going to transform her in perspective. Again, my horizon line for the girl does not match the horizon line for the background. And I've tried all sorts of tricks. I've tried putting the anchor point in between the two of them. If you want to see what I'm talking about, hit Command H to bring back, this is the horizon line for the scene. And I'm going to pull another guideline down. This is the horizon line for her. So we can try putting the anchor point in the middle, but I got to be honest with you, every time that the perspective is off like this, we're trying to fix something that's not fixable. So there's a million ways you can do it, but none of them, in my opinion, work any better than any other. So we'll just try this. To do it, again, I'm going to transform the girl again, Command T. I'm going to grab the anchor point right now, and I'm going to put it right in between the two. So it'll be right pretty much in the middle of her chest. Again, I want to bring her right towards the camera, so I'm putting the point right on top of her. If I wanted to move her to the left or to the right, I would put the anchor point either to the left or the right. But again, clicking on the link between the width and the height, I'm going to simply grab the lower point and I'm going to pull her forward. And that feels a little bit better. So is this correct? Or if you hit Command Z to undo that, take the anchor point and put it up on top of the guideline on the top, her horizon line, and do the same thing again. Pull her forward. Does that feel better? It looks basically the same to me. Command Z to undo that. And then we'll try the horizon line for the scene and pull her forward. And that one does not feel good to me. So Command Z. So it's either, I'm going to do the one that's right in the middle, and we'll just see. So again, in this case, you want to hold down the Shift option and then pull her forward. And that seems about right. Again, I'm trying to look and say, well, how much closer to me is she than she was at the door? Because she's clearly bigger now, but that's the way it would actually have to be. So I'm going to just go with this and say, okay. Now, I don't want to see the lines anymore. I don't need these lines anymore. So I could hit Command H, but that will hide other things that I don't want to hide. So I'm going to get rid of the guidelines by going up to the View menu, down to Guides, and then Clear Guides, and they're gone. So what is the first thing that I need to do about this image in terms of the lighting? Looking at the girl and looking at my scene, what's wrong? Well, yeah, I mean, there's clearly the exposure part is radically off, but I'm looking for something more fundamental. Oh, well, the white balance is clearly something that's a problem. Where's the shadow on the girl's face?
Underneath her chin.
Where else?
On the sides of her neck.
Yeah, which side of her neck? Come on, guys, you cannot see a highlight on this side and shadow over here? You don't see that? Oh my God, guys, come on. This is Photo 101. Zoom in and look at this girl's face. Highlight here, shadow here. No? Look at my scene. Where are all the lights in my scene? They're on the shadow side. This girl is the wrong way. We need to flip her. So you go up to the image menu, make sure that your girl is still selected, up to the image menu, edit menu, down to transform, and we are going to flip her horizontally. Now the light side of her face is next to the lights where they're coming down from the side of the building. Look at the difference that just made. That alone gets me a lot more believable. No? This is the shit that you guys need to be looking for, is exactly this kind of stuff. Okay, so now I need to try to figure out, I need to get her color. Again, this is where the extreme color matching part comes in. So again, the recipe for this is all sitting in that same PDF that I used to develop the color swatches to do this. This one I know by heart though, so because again, I do this kind of work. So to do this, we're going to actually add the other type of gradient adjustment layer. So if you come to your adjustment layers, click on the flyout menu, and we are going to do a gradient map. Not a gradient, but a gradient map. And when you do that, typically your image goes black and white. That's only because my foreground and background colors are black and white, and that's what the gradient map thinks I want to do. I also need to pull my swatches out so that I can see them. So I'm going to grab the swatches tab and just bring it out so that I can actually see them. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom where they're actually visible to me. And then we're going to actually edit this gradient map. So what a gradient map is, if you come over to the properties panel, you'll actually see gradient map you'll see gradient. And yours can be flipped, it can be reversed. You don't need to worry about any of that. We're going to completely rebuild this map. But if you click on the gradient, the preview of the gradient here, click on it, you will open up what they call the gradient editor. And this is where we're going to actually build our gradient map. So I'm going to pull the gradient editor over here to the side. You don't even need to look at this figure to do this work. So the way we're going to do this is that you will see underneath this gradient there's stops, and these stops are mapping tone to an underlying tone underneath it. So right now the two match. So on this side we have black, on this side we have white, and we've got it's a grayscale. It's just running, it's just a black and white image. You can now change these stops, and you can add them and you can move them around to actually construct a different mapping of color to tone. And that's what we're going to do. So to start with, I'm going to click on the stop that is right underneath the black point over here. It actually is a black point. I'm going to, yes?
How did you get to the gradient editor?
So if you do you have the gradient in your properties panel at the top? Just double click or just click on the preview of the gradient. Okay, does everybody have this thing open? Okay, so I'm going to click on the first stop, the one that's under the black one. I'm going to click on that, and you'll see you get a color picker down here at the very bottom. Click on the color picker, and then you want to come over and you want to click on the darkest swatch, and the one that we actually built. This was the shadow area that I built. I'm going to click on that, and it actually loads that really dark color as my new color for my shadow part in this gradient map. And you can see the gradient has already taken on a brown tone. It's no longer got gray, really completely gray in it. At this stage of the game, you need to make a note of the brightness. So you can see my brightness right now is 10%. So you're going to go ahead and say okay to that. And then in the location, you put in the brightness percentage. My brightness was 10%, so you put in 10 for that. Now, I'm going to do my highlight color next. So I'm going to go up to the white stop that's up at the very top. I'm going to click on that. Again, it loads that color into the color picker underneath it. I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to come over and I'm going to click on my bright yellow color. I'm going to notice the brightness value. You'll see it's 95%. I'm going to say okay to this. And then in the location, I'm going to type in 95. Now we need to add 3 more stops to this. So it doesn't matter where you add them because we're using the brightness to set where the location along this gradient, along the tonal range actually is. So I'm just going to hover over just in the kind of like the 3/4 tones range of my image. I'm going to click, and it's going to add another stop. It gives it the same color that I just used. That's not what I want to do. So I'm going to click on that, and in my color picker, I'm going to click this to open it up, and then I'm going to click on not the darkest color, but the next darkest color. I'm going to look at where the location is, or the brightness. It's 25%. I'm going to say okay to that, and I'm going to put in 25 for my location. Then I need to do another stop that's more in the very middle of my image. So I'm just going to come up and click on a stop in the middle of my image. Click on this to load the color down in the color swatch underneath it. Click on that to open up the color picker, and then we're going to click on the medium swatch, the one that's in the very middle. Again, I'm going to look at my brightness level, which is 45, so that's going to be my location. I'm going to hit OK and then type in 45. And then finally, I've got one last one to do. I'm going to click on the sort of the quarter tones. Click on the color picker to open it up. And then I'm going to click on that lighter beigeier color. Look at my brightness value. It's 65. So I'm going to say OK. Put in 65 as my location. And I'm going to say OK to this. I'm going to close up my swatches panel. I don't need this part anymore. I'm going to change the blending mode of this gradient right now. Well, 2 things I'm going to do to it. The first thing is I'm going to change the blending mode from normal down to color. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is actually to clip this to my image below, because right now this is affecting my entire scene. So I'm gonna hover over the space between the figure and this new gradient map, hold down my Option key, and you'll get the weird little, square with the arrow that's pointing down. Click. It will actually then clip this to the girl alone, although that looks like it's still, wow, that's how good that mapping is. It looks like it's exact. So my feeling about this, though, is I think that it's too strong. Again, she would not be entirely bathed in that light. So I'm just going to use my opacity slider. Working of the gradient layer, I'm just going to use my opacity slider to back this off. And I'm around 60, 65%, somewhere in there. That seems like a better figure for me in terms of all this. Okay, we're not done yet. So 2 things really quickly we're going to do to trick this out, and we will have this done by 4 o'clock, I swear, guys, and we will take a break. So a couple other things. I need to then start to think about emulating the lighting. It's not just the color range here. It's actually the lighting effect of this as well. I've got street lights that are really up on the high side, and as they're washing down on my scene, I mean, look at the difference in what the tone on the wall looks like right here. Pretty bright, and then even though you're actually you've got some other material on the wall back here, you can look at the doorway. The doorway is lighter up at the top and considerably darker down at the bottom. So the light is washing down from the top to the bottom. I need to emulate that very same thing on her. So to do this, I think right now what I'm going to do, to be honest with you, is I am going to run my check layers on top of this. So I'm going to go to my actions palette. I'm going to find my check layers because I want to set the luminosity of her first. I'm going to click on this to run the check layers. I'm going to turn off my color. I'm going to put my luminosity on. She seems way too bright for this scene. So to fix that, I'm going to click on my gradient map. So this has changed the color of her. We'll see how well the color works once we go to the color check layer, but I'm pretty confident about the way it's looking right now. I'm going to add another layer on top of this just to control my exposure. I can approach this 2 ways. I could just actually go in and add a curve to this. Well, here, I'll show you. We'll do both versions. I'm going to click and add just a curve on top of this. I'm going to change the blending mode of my curve from normal down to luminosity, because that's all I'm changing. And then I'm going to clip this curve to the figure, holding down the Option key, click, and then I'm just going to start pulling from the top down. Again, a lot of people think you can make your image. A lot of people will go for the midtones and click and drag down to make it darker. The problem with that is that it keeps the black points and the white points anchored where they are. Her face doesn't get any darker. It's just the midtones are getting pulled down. Instead, I need to pull down the highlights. So I'm going to click on the white point up at the very top of this and simply start to drag down till I feel a little bit better about the spacing in this. And I'm feeling like this looks a little bit better. So this is one option that I would have. I'm going to uncheck my check layer here and then use this curve on and off. And it's bringing it down. I feel a little bit better about that. Another way to do it, though, instead of that, I'm going to turn off the curve. I'm going to click on my luminosity check layer. You're not going to be able to see this. We're going to have to guess at this one. But because this is a smart object, I can actually run a smart filter on it. So I'm going to select the figure that is my smart object, and I'm going to add a camera raw adjustment filter to it. So up to the filter menu, to camera raw. And in this, I'm just going to bring the exposure down a stop. Again, you can't see this in relationship to anything else, so you pretty much have to guess. So I'm just going to grab the exposure and bring it down a stop. Now, this is actually, I think, a better way of doing it because this is now exposure as if everything, not just her highlights were being pulled down, but actually the whole exposure of her body was being pulled down. So I'm going to see what that looks like. So I'm going to say okay to that. And I'm going to turn my luminosity back off and back on. I feel like that's a little extreme. I like it better than the curve, but I think it's a little too far. So I'm going to simply double click on the camera raw filter to go back into it. And I'm going to open this up a third of a stop. So she's around 65 and negative 65 instead. And this actually looks considerably better to me, much better than the curve. So I'm going to throw my curve away because I like this better. I'm going to turn my luminosity off. I'm going to then go to my color check layer and turn it on and see how I feel about this. And then looking at this girl, I could still fine tune this a little bit if I want. I think that my gradient map has gotten me a whole lot of the way there, but I still feel like in a weird way that there's a little bit more yellow in the figure. I mean, her face is kind of matching the background a little bit, but I think that this part, the dress is, again, it's a red dress, so I don't know that I'm that crazed about it, but if I did want to tweak it a little bit more, I would click on the adjustment layer, the gradient map adjustment layer that I'm using to do the overall color, and then I'm just going to add another color balance layer on top of it. This is the work that you guys did for the composite that you actually turned in. I'm going to change the blending mode of that color balance layer from normal down to color. Again, same thing we've been doing all along. I'm going to clip it now to the girl so that it only impacts the girl and not the scene. Holding down the Option key, click between the two layers. And then I'm going to just pump in a little bit more yellow. And I might actually push in, pull a little bit more red out. And I don't know that I'm really helping this at all. We'll actually see. I'm going to turn off my color check layer. And then I'm going to turn off this additional color layer that I've actually added. And I got to be honest with you. I think it's a better match, but I like the version without it better, so I am going to throw the color check layer away. Then finally, I'm going to do my saturation check. And in the saturation check, looking at this, things actually seem pretty well balanced to me. I don't see that there's a radical difference in this, so I'm not going to change any of my saturation part, but I'm not done quite yet. So I need to then recreate that sense of light coming from the top down. So to do that, the easiest way I know to do this part is we're going to add another curve on top of this. So again, I'm going down to my gradient map. So the only two changes that I've made in here so far are my gradient map and then the exposure adjustment layer that I did with my camera raw. Those are the only two things I've changed here to get this girl as close as we are right now. So I'm going to add another adjustment layer on top of my gradient map to darken the bottom part of her dress. So to do that, just add a regular curve. We're going to change the blending mode to luminosity. We're going to clip this curve to the gradient map so that it only impacts the girl and not my whole scene. So again, I'm holding down the Option key, clicking to do that. And then I'm actually going to, this range, I want to make the lower part of her skirt, this lower part darker. It's not really so much her head, it's this part that's actually down here. So I'm just going to grab my black point, a slider, and I'm going to pull this over like that. And we'll sort of see. I'm gonna modify this layer mask in just a second, and then we'll go in and fine tune this thing to be how we feel like it actually should be here, because I feel like this is adding a lot of contrast to it, and I'm not sure I want to do that part. But I'm going to now invert my layer mask to hide it. So again, click on the layer mask of this new curve, Command I to invert it so it doesn't show now. And then you definitely need to go to the pasteboard for this. So hit the F key to get to the pasteboard. And I'm going to zip back out. So the trick to this is that I want this to fade. I want to actually, I want it to be lighter up on the very top, but I want it to start getting darker about at her waist. And then as we get down to the very bottom, I want it to be the darkest at her feet. So I want a really subtle change in darkness at her waist. And then as we go all the way down, by the time we get to her feet, I want it to be the full darkness, the full impact once I reach her feet. To do that, you're going to hit the B key to get a brush. You got to make sure that this is the softest brush you can get, so 0% hardness. And then here's the trick. You need to make the brush, you need to put the center of your brush right over where her feet are, And then I use the bracket keys just to the right of the P key to make my brush larger or smaller. You need to make this brush larger so that the very edge of it reaches her waist. So what this brush will do when I use it now is it's going to have the full impact of the brush will be at her feet, which will allow the full impact of the curve to be at her feet. But by the time I reach her waist, that's where the brush is at the very edge. It's just fading out, so the very least amount of impact is going to happen there. So working on my layer mask, make sure white is your foreground color, and here's the trick. You don't paint. You click once, and that's it. Don't touch anything else. Now, once we do that, you can take a look at this, and we can adjust the curve. So I'm going to click on the curve. I don't think that the darkening black part just worked well. I'm going to actually grab this more in the 3/4 range and pull this down. I like what that does better. It's not quite so dark on her. So that's getting me part of the way there, but I need to do this same trick again. I'm needed to actually then start at sort of like where the flowers are and drop off even more. So you don't even have to rebuild this curve. You can just Command J this curve again. So Command J will actually make a copy of it. It needs to be clipped. So I'm going to hover over the Option key and click to clip it. It does. It's already picked the luminosity for me. Now the gradient that I've got on here is starting at her waist again. I don't want it to start at her waist again. I want it to start more where the flowers are. So I'm going to fill my layer mask now of this second curve with black. Black is my background color. Command Delete will fill it. And then I need to do the same brush trick, but this time I'm going to start with the center of my brush right where her feet are, but then the edge of her brush pretty much right underneath the flowers. So I need to make this a smaller brush. And then again, white is my foreground color. I'm working on my layer mask. The middle of her brush is right at her feet. You click once. And then finally, icing on the cake, we need to add a shadow underneath her to anchor her in this space. So come down and click on your background layer. So I've clicked on my background layer to make it active. I'm going to add a new layer on top of that. It's an empty layer. I'm going to hit the G key to get my gradient tool. We're just making shadows the way we've made them all along. G key to get the gradient tool up to the gradient at the very top in the options bar. You want to make sure that you're picking a classic gradient. In the drop-down menu that opens up, open up your basics. You want to make sure that you're going from foreground to transparent, the one in the middle. This is exactly what we've done this 4 or 5 times in class, guys. So it's the exact same thing. Say okay to that. And then finally, remember, it's a radial gradient, not a linear gradient, but a radial gradient. So in the 5 little types of gradient across the top, you're picking the second from the left. And then I'm going to come over to my image and I'm simply going to click and drag down. That puts a really black gradient that's radial. It's a circle. It fades out to nothing. That's what why you go to transparency. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. If I want to crush this, but I want to bring the top down and the bottom up. So to do that, you hold down the Option key, and then when you click on one control handle, it does both. I've got a pancake now that I can bring and put right underneath her feet. That is too wide now. The gradient itself would go somewhat to the left, to the right, because my lights are on this side, so it will kick something off to the right. So I'm going to extend it off to the right like this, but I also need it to be solid underneath her. If the lines bother you, the transform lines, because for me, I think they get in the way, Command H will hide them, but they'll still be there, and you can see you can move your gradient around. You can use your arrow keys to really fine-tune your gradient to move it around, but I feel like this is actually working pretty well for me right here. So Command H brings back your gradient handles. I'm going to click on the check mark to say OK, and then finally the E key to get the eraser tool. Make it a little bit bigger. There would be no shadow on the light side of her body. There's no shadow on this side of her face. There would be no shadow on the ground here either. So you just need to erase that. Double click on the hand, hit the F key once. Is that where we started? again, you go into an interview at some retouching place and you do something like this, they're going to have no idea what hit them. And that's when you ask them for a lot of money. Right? I mean, come on. Yes? No? Work? Right? All right. I promised you I'd have this done before 4 o'clock, and I did. So it's 3:55, guys. Let's do a hard 10. Be back at 5 minutes after 4, and we will continue on. We're actually going to work on some of your all's composites. So I do this every class. Some of the composites you guys turned in, they're graded. I sent you stuff back. But I would like to actually practice working on composite samples with the whole class. So are you guys comfortable with letting everybody else in this class work on a copy of your file if I pick your file? If anybody's not happy with that, let me know. Yeah, okay. I'll see you guys in 10. Yep, you can close it up. Oh, the assignment sheet went around. Did everybody get on it? I don't know where it landed. Oh, thanks. Just make sure you're on it. So I actually like this part of the class in some ways the most. Hey guys, if you just got back in really quickly, you need to go to our server, the class server, and to photography, to class projects. We're heading for the Dropbox, the same into the Engelhard folder. There's a new folder in that Engelhard folder called Comps for Class. I need you to copy that folder to your desktop because that's got the files in it that we're going to work on. Anyway, what I was going to say is that the reason I like working on these is that it's sort of like, well, it takes your work, but it's sort of like, it brings up all sorts of issues or all sorts of things to think about and to look at that I wouldn't necessarily come up with on my own. So I kind of love that part about it. So we're going to start on this and just sort of see how well we did. So I'm not pointing fingers at any. This is the same thing as going over the stuff when we look at past assignments. If I've picked one of your files to actually work on and look at, it's because the issues that I run into when I look at your files are issues that everybody is like struggling with. But I think also more importantly, in the case of this, it's also things that I specifically want to point out to you to start thinking about in your own compositing work. Because I think that I've been doing it for a really long time, and I think when you first start out, you sort of think that, okay, it's just, I start at A and I go to B and I go to C, and that's just the plan I always take, and that's sometimes not always the plan that you take. So with that being said, we're going to start with Emily's. So if you can actually grab hers and open this up. No, I am not doing that off of the server. You don't want to launch these off the server. That's why I said copy it to your desktop first, because it'll take forever to launch off your server. So, can everybody get this thing open? Anybody not? Okay. First things first, my copy of it at least has a line that's going through the middle of it. I'm guessing that's a horizon line. It probably is. We do have a way to establish the horizon line using the street, the sidewalk that's behind this part. I'm not really going to go after that because the truth of it is, there's nothing in here I can really scale this against. A lot of times if you have things in your image like a park bench, you can actually do a Google, how tall is the back of a park bench? There's a lot of real standard things in the world. Fire hydrants are all the same height. Garbage cans are all the same height. dumpsters are all the same height. I mean, all of those become these things that you can try to scale your figures to in the same way that we just did the doorway and the, you know, how high a doorbell was, the same way we did the guy in the subway, you know, him in relationship to the windows and the door of the subway. I mean, all of those things can help give you clues to this. There's really nothing in this image right here that is close enough to her that I can do that with. So I'm not going to really worry about that part of it. I am going to get rid of the line. So to do that, up to the view menu and down to guides, and we're going to clear the guides on this. So then I'm going to zip in here and take a look at her feet, and you can see one of the problems I have with the shadows is it's actually on top of the boots. And the reason that is if you go up to the very top, you'll see that the shadows are sitting on the very top of our image. They're the top or uppermost of our image layers. So there's a set of adjustment layers in here that are trying to match the figure, but they're right off the bat, the shadows need to be moved. So I'm going to click on those and simply drag them down where they belong. And they belong on top of the background, but underneath her feet. And you can see now they're in the wrong place, but that's okay. We can fix these things. That's not really the issue here. We are going to come back and fix these things in a minute, but right now I want to look at other things in this image. So I'm going to double click on the hand again, and when I'm down here, I'm taking a look at this and I'm thinking, wait a minute, there's two background images in here. What's going on here? So I'm going to turn off the top background layer, and lo and behold, underneath it, Emily was very smart. She did exactly what I said to do. Take a friend out there, take somebody out there that you can scale this with and shoot this so that you can look at the lighting on the real person, so that you can scale this to the real person. You can do all those things. So that's what we're going to do with this. I'm going to turn off the composite figure so that I can just have the figure that's actually in that space. And I'm also going to turn off the shadows. We don't need that part right here. And I just want to start with this image. And this is something that you guys need to focus on and think about. So the the two figures that I gave you were both white balanced, and they both had perfect exposure. Both of those things had happened to them. But when I look at this image, that is not the case for this image right now. We can change that, but right now that is not the case. When I look at this, this seems slightly underexposed to me, and it also seems blue to me. It seems like it's got a lot of blue sky in it. So I want to actually color balance this and change the exposure. Well, we're in luck. It's a smart object. Again, another thing Emily did that was great. You brought in smart objects. The raw data is in this image. So I'm going to double click on this to go into Camera Raw. I'm getting this warning. It says we cannot edit this smart object because this layer is locked. And I'm going to say okay to that. So I'm going to just duplicate this original first. Command J. And now the second version of this is not locked. So I'm going to double click on it to go back into Camera Raw. And the first thing I'm going to do is to try to white balance this. Now, she's not holding a color card, so I got to find something else in this image to white balance. So I start to look at the background. I'm going to zip into the background and take a look at what's going on back here. And what I'm looking for is anything here in this background that I know should be white, should be a neutral color, not white necessarily, but a neutral color. So I've got cars that are gray that might be a neutral color. I'm looking around. Signs are usually a good place to go to. You can be fairly certain that that sign is supposed to be, it's a very light gray, but a gray nonetheless. So I'm going to continue to look around, and lo and behold, I hit this white car that's right back here. So I'm just going to use the white car. So I'm going to select the white balance tool. It's the little eyedropper in the color panel on the far right side. Click on that, and then I'm simply going to click on the car. And you see it radically warms this up. But now at least the composite that I've got, if I want this image to be blue like this is blue right now, before I just did that correction, I would then, I would do this correction, I would then do the composite, put them together so that the colors match, the white balance is matched, and then I would make my entire composite blue. So that's why so Emily could look at me and say, well, that's not the intent. I didn't want this thing to be neutral color. I wanted it to be blue and moody. And I'm not going to argue with that. I'm just going to say, okay, well, I got to get the composite put together first, and then we'll make this thing, we'll shift it back to being blue and moody again once we do that part. So I'm going to do that. And then the second thing I'm going to do, I'm going to kick back out again. I hit the auto button. I do this all the time. I'm going to just click on the auto button to see what it does. And you can see it brightens up my image. And I think that that actually helps. I feel like it needed to be brightened up. I felt like things were a little bit underexposed. If I come in and take a look at this girl's top, and I'm not going to stay the area that's right under her boobs, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to actually go more on top of her chest, right near the part that's near her neckline. And again, what I'm looking for here is what we all determined was the sort of the minimum value that we would have to have shadow detail printable. And you can see, even though this is like a sort of a velour kind of fabric, it's a very matte fabric, so it's sucking up a lot of light. But I'm reading my RGB readouts on the very top of my histogram, and these are too low. I need to be in the mid-20s for something that I feel like I could actually see. And I'm basing all of the rest of my image on this one thing right here. So I'm going to put a color sampler point on that. So the color sampler tool in Camera Raw all the way to the right, down at the very bottom, the little eyedropper with a little icon next to it, and I'm going to click on a spot up in here that I feel like that was actually white balance, so that wasn't what I wanted. The color dropper tool and drop this sort of like up in here, and you can see I'm reading close to these 25s. My green is a little bit deficient in here. I'm going to just push my exposure up a little bit more. Not quite into the 30s. So I've got a half a stop more exposure. Between the auto correction on this and the exposure part, I hit it up. Now, the thing that I like about using auto is that it does a really good job at establishing your contrast, your highlight settings, your shadows, your whites, and your blacks. What it's trying to do is separate those tones as much as it can to actually give you detail. So you need to remember that difference in tonality equals detail. If you have two tones that are identical to one another and they are right next to each other, they are the same thing. That is not detail. Detail is variation of tone. So this contrast move, the highlights move, the shadow move, all of that is trying to give me the maximum amount of detail in that tonal range. The thing that I always argue about, not always, but usually argue about within the auto button in Camera Raw is the exposure. Again, I shoot a lot of stuff that are on white backgrounds, and if you use an auto exposure on a white background, it's going to make the whole image way too damn dark because it's trying to make the white some more mid-tone color. So anyway, it doesn't mean because you disagree with the exposure that you ignore everybody else. I'm going to keep everybody else in here. You'll also notice that it's actually popping up my vibrance, and it's doing other things in my the color part of here as well. It's adding some vibrance and some saturation into this part as well. I'm going to zip back out, and I feel better about this image the way it is right now. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. I think it brightens it up more. So now the likelihood that it's going to match the comp figure that I'm trying to put into it is greater. However, when I go to the background that does not have the girl in it, it's not a smart object. So I have to cheat to apply these same things that just changed to this thing that is not a smart, it's not the raw data. Now, I'm fairly certain that Emily shot this right after she shot the one with the girl in it, and it could have been that raw file would be in here. I would go back and get the raw file, but I don't have it, so we're going to do the next best thing. We're going to turn this thing into a smart object again, but only so that we can use the Camera Raw Smart Filter on it. So to do that, up to the Layer menu, down to Smart Objects, and Convert to Smart Object. And then if you put the Camera Raw filter on it, you'll see what happens. So I'm going to come up and add the Camera Raw filter. You'll see if you've used the Camera Raw filter in the past, it'll always be up at the very top. You don't want to pick the version at the very top because this will not only, it'll apply the Camera Raw filter, but it also apply the last settings that were used, and those have no meaning for what the image that we're working on right now. So I'm going to come down here to my Camera Raw filter, and then I can do the same thing. There is, again, that same white car is in the background, so I'm going to actually go after that car that's in the background. And I'm going to grab my white balance tool, and I'm going to click on that car, and it now white balances my image. But now I've got something different. I have an auto exposure up here. If I click on the auto exposure, it brightens things up a little bit, but I'll notice here, this is not the half stop that I was looking for. The problem that you have here in this is that there's different subject matter in here as well. So this auto is not necessarily going to work the way you think it should. So I'm going to uncheck the auto part. I am going to keep the white balance tool that I did. I am going to say okay to this. And then I'm going to go back into the smart object, the original one, the one that we did all the correction in. I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to copy down the values of this in the exposure part. So my top exposure was plus 0.5. My contrast was a plus 6. I'm just writing this down. My highlights were a minus 25. My shadows were a plus 32. My whites are a plus 9. My blacks are a minus 17. And then I also want to pick up to just see what you can't use temperature and tint here. They don't work the same in the camera raw filter as they do. However, the vibrance and the saturation, you can. Those are the same. So it's a plus 20 for the vibrance and a plus 5 for the saturation. I'm going to hit cancel out of here. I'm going to go back to my camera raw filter as just my regular scene. And then I need to change my exposure now is, you can do the same numbers with me, is a plus 0.5. The contrast was a plus 6. The highlights are a minus 25. The shadows are a plus 32. Sorry, plus 32. The whites are a plus 9. Oh, come on. And the blacks are a minus 17. And then the vibrance is a plus 20. And the saturation is a plus 5. And now my settings should be very close to the same. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And so this is now what my background looks like corrected. So you can see this is the difference. I'm going to just invert my smart filter mask on this. This is where Emily started and what she was trying to match to, and this is what she should have been matching it to. Now, unfortunately, when we do this, all of the color corrections that she has done in here are no longer valid because I've completely changed the color, I've changed the I've changed everything. So all of the work that she has done on here no longer makes any sense. It doesn't. It's not going to ultimately work for us. So we're going to start from scratch on that. So I'm going to get rid of all the 3 adjustment layers that are on top of the figure. So it's a hue saturation, a color balance, and a curve. I'm going to delete all those. She does have a shadow highlight on here. I'm going to open this up. When you open up any dialogue in Photoshop, this works in Camera Raw, where it works in pretty much all the dialog boxes in here. If you want to reset this to its default, you hold down the Option key. And when you look at the Cancel button right here, when you hold down the Option key, it changes to a Reset button. If you click on that, it'll take it back to what it was in the very beginning. So I know that from the very beginning that the shadows are always at 35%. Emily had brought it down to a 15. What she had made, obviously she was adjusting it to the scene, but we've changed the scene. So I just want to get that back to where there's nothing happening on that part of it. And then I've got my luminosity check layer, my saturation, and my color check layers are on here as well. So I'm going to turn the eyeball back on for this. However, I want to scale this correctly because I don't think right now it's in the same position as the figure. So I'm going to turn off the background layer so that I can see the figure. And you can actually see now that my figure that's on top right here, I'm going to hit the V key to move it, and I want to put their feet together. So with their feet together, I'm a pretty good guesser of size or height in here. I'm going to guess your friend is probably that 5'5" to 5'8" kind of range, sort of mid-5. Is she really tall or really short? No, she's kind of in the middle-ish. Yeah. So that's kind of where, right? So if she's 5'3", then the girl that I know who is actually 5'11" and in heels, typical model height, needs to be considerably taller than this girl. Because right now, if you draw down guidelines here, I'm going to put a guideline at the bottom of her feet and then do another guideline right up here at the top of her head. So I know that the figure that I'm trying to add to this has got to be considerably taller than that. So if I figure, again, I'm just judging and thinking that Emily's friend is probably, again, 5'6", 5'7", somewhere in there. This girl is going to be in heels 6 feet tall. That's another, let's say 5'7", that's another 5-6 inches more. Your head is about 5 or 6 inches tall. So I'm going to put our model's chin at about the top of this girl's head. So again, with the figure, the comp body selected, Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. It's going to say it temporarily needs to turn off the smart filter to do that. I'm fine with that. I'm going to grab the anchor point and drop it down to the bottom so that her feet do not move. Her head just moves, or I mean, her whole upper, her body from her feet up goes up. Click on the link between the width and the height, and then simply crank to make her tall enough that her face is about the bottom of that girl's, I'm not going to exaggerate it too much, but now I think she's scaled more appropriately to the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. I'm going to turn off the girl that's underneath here and just turn on my new background. So this is my new background. Again, I've got guidelines in here that I don't need. This is where I was going to say was the top of her head. Could the model be a little bit taller? Probably, but she feels better in this space for me right now. So I'm gonna get rid of these guidelines. Command H will temporarily hide them. And then this has got that camera raw filter on here. I'm gonna throw this camera raw filter, I need the one on the girl. It's got a shadow and highlight filter on there. I'm gonna simply throw that away. And there's a camera raw filter. No, that's the only thing that was on the girl. So I'm going to turn on my luminosity check layer, and you can see in this scene right here, the girl is too dark and she's clearly too contrasty. So there were people who actually tried to use a curve to lift this contrast. It doesn't work. You can't use curves to do this. It does just this weird shit to your image. So it's not the one thing to use. If your figure was not a smart object, you would make it one so that you could actually then control this smart filter. So to use the smart filter, I'm going to come up to the image menu, down to adjustments, down to shadows and highlights. This is what you want to use to control both of these. So when this happens, it actually comes on. This is the default that it's on. The shadows are seriously opened in here. I think that in some ways they actually fit this scene better. You can use your preview check mark to turn this on and off. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit more. I like to see a little bit more image and say, do I believe this? Do I feel that this is the correct side? I actually think that the highlights need to be opened up a little bit more on this. So you don't just use the shadow slider to open up stuff in the middle. You can use the highlights to lift those as well. So I'm going to grab the highlight slider and I'm going to push this. This is actually recovering them. So I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to use a curve to do the highlights on this part. But I feel like the shadows are pretty well opened here for this scene. I'm looking at her sleeve and the area that is around this. It's a good sort of fit in there. I still need to open up the area that's really dark underneath all of this, but I'm feeling like this part is a pretty close hit here. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Then I do feel like I need to open up her face just a little bit more. So I'm going to click on my composite body. I'm going to add a curve on top of that. This is the same luminosity work you guys were doing for all of your stuff. So I'm going to add a curve on top of this. I'm going to change the blending mode of this curve to luminosity. I'm going to clip this curve to her body by hovering in between the two layers, adding the option key to clip this, and then I'm going to take the white point slider only and push it slightly to the left. And you can see you can really lift this up a little bit. I don't want to push it too hard, but I feel like that looks a little bit better to me. Again, you can use the eyeball that's right next to this to sort of see what happened. It lifts everything just a little bit. I like that part of it also. I'm going to go ahead and see how this looks in real life. I'm going to turn my luminosity check layer off. I'm going to back out of here again. I feel like this fits the scene reasonably well. Again, the color on this is off. I feel like also that the saturation on her, I feel like we've lifted the, we've lifted her coat a little bit too much. She looks a little too light here. So I'm going to turn that curve off again. So I like what this curve is doing on her face, but I don't like what it's doing on the rest of her body. And I'm going to just back it off about halfway. I'm going to split the difference. Yeah, and that's feeling a little bit better. I do need to open up the shadows on her body, so I'm going to add another curve on top of the one that I've got right now. So again, click on this. We're going to add another curve. We're going to change its blending mode to luminosity. In this case, I'm going to really lift the shadow. So I'm going to grab the shadow point at the bottom, because again, I'm trying to open up all this black. So I'm going to just push this way up, and I don't worry about this right now, because once I get the layer mask actually built on this, then I can readjust the curve to give me the effect that I really want. So I'm going to invert my layer mask now. So click on the layer mask, Command I to invert it. Again, I need to clip it to my figure so that it's only impacting the figure and nothing else. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. Make sure it is a soft brush, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and like a 3, 4, 5% flow. I am going to use, you guys don't have to go to your tablet, I just happen to have mine handy. So I am going to go to mine. And white is my foreground color, make my brush smaller. And I'm just going to start scrubbing in these areas in here to actually lift this part. Around her neck, a little bit under her arm, her crotch, this other arm over here, this part in here a little bit. Continue to open this up in here. And so this is now what I've done really quickly. I've just lifted that part. That's all I need to do. I'm not too worried about the rest of this. Then I need to actually worry about, though, everything else in here. I need to worry about my color, so I'm going to turn on my color check layers. And with the color check layers on, you can see her face is sort of matching the ground, but clearly the blue is sort of like matching the sky that's actually behind here. But for me, I feel like that the outfit itself needs to match. It needs to be more this orangey color. So that's what I'm gonna put on it, and then we'll make a judgment and see how we feel about it after the fact. So I'm gonna add another adjustment layer above the thing that just opened up the shadows on her coat, and the adjustment layer that I'm gonna add is a color balance. Again, your first move is to change the blending mode of this from normal down to color. And then again, to clip this to everybody else so that it only impacts the girl. So Option key, click to clip it. And now what I need is to add yellow in this. Obviously, I need to actually move in this direction, but people get thrown when they're thinking about adding oranges to stuff. So orange is a combination of yellow and red. I need to boost both of those. So I'm going to grab the yellow slider first, and I'm just going to start to push it over. I'm not going to go too far. I'm going to stop there. So I went to a -10. I'm going to grab my red slider now and push it in the opposite direction. And you can see I'm driving this to be much closer to the color of the area that is surrounding her completely. What I saw happen with a lot of you guys, look at my screen here really quickly. I just want to show you this actually happened to a lot of you in trying to balance color, and I'm not going to even look at the color here, but I had people who would actually add yellow and then add magenta and then add cyan. If you do that, those are all three of the secondary primary colors. That is like adding the opposite of red, green, and blue. And if you add exactly the same amount of those, all you're really doing is making the image darker or lighter. You're not changing the color at all because you are adding equal amounts of all three primaries. So this would never happen. If you ever start to get into this stage of the game right here, this is wrong, is all I can say. So again, I'm going to go back. Mine was a -10 and then a +9. Yeah, and that's beginning to get, I think, where I want to be. So I'm going to turn off my color check layers at the very top. And then I turn the color layer on and off just to see how I feel about this. And I feel like this is much better fit for what's going on in my scene. And then finally, I'm going to do my saturation check layer just to see. And you can see I've got some saturation in the greens, but her face really stands out in this more than anything. So I am going to knock the saturation of that down just a little bit. So I'm going to come down and add one more adjustment layer on top of the color balance that I just did. I'm going to add hue saturation. I'm going to, again, change the blending mode from normal down to saturation. I'm going to clip that layer to the ones that are underneath it. Option key. Get out of here. Option key to clip it, and then I'm just going to grab the saturation and pull it down a little bit. I'm not going to go whole hog on this. I'm not going to like try to get her to be as dark as her jacket, her coat. She would be black and white if we did that. So I'm going to turn off my saturation check layer, and this is where I'm actually at in my scene right here. Now I'm feeling pretty good about where this is at. What I'm not feeling good about is the tree that's growing right outside the top of her head. So I'm going to move her before I do anything else. So when I move her, the problem that I'm going to have when I move this is that this curve that's controlling the shadows on her coat, they need to move with it. I can't move just her, or they won't. The mask that I did here will no longer be in register. I don't want that part to happen. So I'm going to select the girl as the base layer. I'm going to go up to the top of all of my adjustment layers. You don't really have to add the color balance or the hue saturation to any of this because they're universal. But the clipping is what's controlling them. But at any rate, I'm going to just add them to keep everything that's controlling this girl into one spot. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click on that top layer. It selects all of them, and I'm going to put those into a group. To do that, you go to the menu item to the right of the layers palette, click on the flyout menu, and we're going to come up and do new group from layers. And I'm going to call it body. You could call it subject. And then I'm going to move her over to the left a little bit because I don't want that tree growing out right at the center of her head. So V key to get the move tool and just drag her slightly over to the side. Better. Okay. So this is, I'm feeling pretty good about this one here. So we're going to see now, we're going to actually try to add the correct shadows on this. So to do that, I'm going to come back to my original background. I'm going to ignore the shadows that are on top of this. I'm just going to start ours from scratch. I am going to add an empty layer on top of this and call it Shadow 1. And then hit the G key to get the gradient tool. The G key to get the gradient tool, the G key. Oh, it's actually naming my file G. Okay, G key to get the gradient tool. We should still be set up for shadows. So again, it's a classic gradient. In the drop-down preview part, in the basics, it is the second one, foreground to transparency. My foreground color is black, which is what I want. If yours is not, hit the D key to default them, and then the X key to change it if it has to be. And then a radial gradient, the second of the icons from the left in the terms of the type of gradient. I'm just going to click and pull down a quick little line. It gives me a gradient. Command T to actually bring up the transform dialog box. I'm going to then hold down the Option key and crush this like a pancake. And then I'm going to put this underneath her 1 foot. I'm going to start with her right foot, and I'm going to zoom way in on this. So this is a contact shadow, and in the contact shadow, there might be a slight shadow over her entire body. We'll look at that in just a second. But a contact shadow tends to be very sharp. It tends to be very dark. And you can see right now that this shadow is actually going, I wrote this to pretty much everybody in this class. Your shadows are going too far out to the left and to the right, and also too far into the front. There's nothing that would cause this shadow that's right here on the side. That does not belong there. It doesn't belong on this side either. So I need to narrow this down. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and click on the left-hand slider to narrow this down. However, I'm getting that shift out to transparency. I really need to keep the meat of the shadow right underneath her foot. So I'm going to bring this, I'm not going to bring it down too much, but I am going to bring the shadow down just a little bit. I'm going to tap with my arrow keys to bring it down just a little bit. You can't do this all with transform. You have to use the eraser tool for part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and accept this transform as it is right now. I'm going to hit the E key to get the eraser tool, and then I'm just going to scrub it away from this side of her body and scrub away from this side of her foot as well. I still feel like this shadow now is too deep. It doesn't mean I can't transform it again. I can. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box, holding down the Option key. I'm going to crush this a little bit more so it's a little bit more pancakey the way a real contact shadow is. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And then again, hit the V key to get the move tool and bring it slightly down. Hit the E key to get the eraser and still clean up this side a little bit more because it would never be there. And the other side, it wouldn't be there as well. And that is the proper contact shadow for what's underneath. And when I turn this on and off, you can see I've got shadow that's out here on both sides. You need to get rid of those because that to transparency works a long way. And you can see there's still more out here. So that is what a proper contact shadow would actually look like under her feet. I think it's a little bit high, so I'm going to hit the V key and use my arrow keys to actually push that up a little bit more. Yeah, I feel better about that. I'm going to do the other side now. We're going to make a new shadow layer. So new blank layer, double click on it and call it Shadow 2. Hit the G key to get the gradient tool, click and drag down. I'm gonna do a little bit larger gradient here because there's more to go under her foot. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Hold down the option key and crush this like a pancake. But then I'm also gonna still hold down the option key and stretch this way out because I need to actually get this thing to go underneath all of her foot. I'm gonna rotate this. Now again, the contact shadow part, the darkest part of my image, which is right here in the middle, that's what needs to go under the front part of her foot. Then I'm going to rotate this back out a little bit more like this. If you feel like your shadow then is not dark enough as it's going towards the back of her foot, and I feel like mine's not, I'm just going to click on the handle in the back and drag this out a little bit further so that I get a little bit more shadow to come out the back. I still think my shadow is too deep now. It's going too far to the back. There's nothing that would explain this, how far towards the back of my scene that this is actually going. So I'm gonna hold down the option key and compress this a little bit more and then rotate this a little bit better so that it's really more under the front part of her foot. Bring this up a little bit more. It's got to rotate still a little bit more. And I feel pretty good about that. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. Immediately hit the E key to get the eraser. There's nothing that explains a shadow in front of her foot right here. That whole thing goes. And then I'm just going to round it off underneath her toe. And then in the back, the same thing. There's nothing that would explain this stuff in the back. All of this goes. And I'm going to soften it up in there. And this feels like, again, I'm going to turn it on and off. You can see I've still got shadow up here in the front, and I've still got shadow in the back. And then turn this on and off again. Still got stuff up here in the front. And still in the back. And then I feel like, again, this shadow needs to go up. It's coming too far down. The V key to get the move tool, and then my arrow keys to just tap it to thin it out just a little bit more. And that's feeling pretty good to me. Ooh, and I just lost my image. How the heck did that happen? Okay. So this is where I'm at right now. I feel like my shadows are probably a little bit too dark. So looking back on this part right here, I'm just going to drop the opacity. So I'm going to start with the left side first. And then I'm going to go to the right side. And that's feeling a little bit better. I'm going to double click on the hand, and then we're just going to see how we did. So I'm going to do a history snapshot of this. I'm going to go up to the very top, and we'll see where we were and where we are. Questions about any of this? So the takeaway from this, guys, is that you really need to think as much about your backgrounds. Half of you, I redeveloped your backgrounds, and it made everything look so much more cohesive. right? You've got to go in, white balance them. You've got to go in and adjust those exposures. You need to do all of that work because you're taking something that you've already white balanced and already done. If you shoot this in the studio and you're not doing perfect exposure and white balance, you have not listened to anything I've taught you in this class. So knowing that your subject is going to have that, your background has to have it as well. Are we good? Okay. I think that's more than enough for today. So I'm not going to start another one on this. If we have time, we might hit another composite or two, because I think that, again, doing this together sort of helps what we're talking about doing here. There are other tricks that I can show you, but that's going to be for another day. The only homework for next week, I want to see files from everybody next week about your final project. If you're not shooting yet, that's fine. You still need to bring in shit that you're, Pinterest that you're getting from Pinterest, whatever, so that you can actually have images to talk about what your final project really is going to be. And then for those of you who actually, like Saffron, for you, and you're in a situation right now that you can actually, try something, right? And you've got enough to just get throw a stab at it so that we can look at it and then say, oh, okay, well then this might help that part better, whatever. You're at that stage of the game, and I think others of you are there as well. So we need to start moving in that direction. Pablo, you had some?
Will we be going over the smoothing assignment next week?
Over the what?
The smoothing assignment?
Oh, yes, we will. Yeah.
For the prints, I know you said you wanted to see before and after.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, no, that's a great question to bring up. Let me just, actually should be part of the video as well. So when we actually go to look at your final project is going to be printed. And so what we need, unlike this, so I can look at this image right now and I can do things like, before and after here really quickly. We can't do that if you've got prints up on the wall. So what I'm asking people to do is bring just small reference prints of what you use to put that all together, right? So just little, like snapshot-y kind of size, and just say, okay, this is what my figure looked like. Oh, you shot that on a gray in the studio. Okay, that makes sense now. And then this background, you shot that from an airplane, and I get that. So to just have those so that we can say, oh, this is what created the final piece. But do not spend any money on doing those befores. You can actually do phaser prints of those. I don't care about that. It's just reference.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions, guys? Okay.